Hi everybody, this is Chris, and today I'm finally going to get around to that talking about how to map old school games. Usually computer RPGs from the 80s through the early 90s, back when there were grids and rooms and basically didn't have auto map available at the time. And big enough that you couldn't keep them all in your head. Some of the early games, you would eventually learn your way around and you wouldn't need to, or the maps were simple enough that you could find your way around without having to really map where you're going. But other games like Bard's Tale, Might and Magic, Wizardry, the maps themselves were part of the experience, were part of the process. And you're missing something if you're not mapping them yourself. Now, you can probably do this online, especially if you're running your game in an emulator where you could have a drawing program open next to you, or even an Excel sheet where you sort of fill in lines and boxes to mark where the walls are. But I've actually found that that style, while it looks cleaner, is harder to do and takes longer and doesn't really allow for notes the same way as just a pencil, a little pencil sharpener, and some graph paper. Nothing really beats, if you're going old school games, you might as well just go all in, grab yourself some of these, sharpen a pencil, and dig in. So don't need a pencil sharpener just now. We'll grab our pencil, and as sort of a launching off point, I want to talk about there's two types of maps you'll be making for these old school games. One is a grid map, and one is a bubble map. Now, a grid map is, a grid map is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You're going to draw a wall, and maybe it goes this way. Like if I'm here, and I know the wall goes down like this, and there's a door here, and then it tees off like that. And this is mostly meant for visual games. This is Ultima, Bard's Tale, Wizardry, Might and Magic. That style of you can see where you are. You can't necessarily see your party, but that's not relevant. The game is something where you're on a map, you can see the map, you have a reference to where you are with regards to other spots. A bubble map would be more for your text adventures. Zork, Enchanter, anything from Infocom, really. And what you're going to do there is you're going to draw a circle for the room you're in, and you will draw lines connecting it to other rooms. And maybe this one goes this way, and this way into three different rooms. And the reason you want a bubble map for these text-based games is this might leave to the east, but then end up coming down and going to this room, which leads back to this room. You'll run into stuff like that with text games where it's not a one-to-one step ratio between the rooms, and so your maps get a little weird. We'll cover that in a few seconds when I show some example maps. But this is sort of the two. These are visual games, these are text games. And in between, we have basically point and click games. And these are your basically anything from Sierra, a lot of the LucasArts style games, where your character is moving around a room, but it's visual. And visual rooms. Oops, that's a B. Rooms. You will use either of these maps. It'll depend on you, it'll depend on the game. So like for King's Quest 1, I ended up using a bubble map. For Quest for Glory, I actually end up using a grid map. And as we get to those, as I get to actually mapping those games out for our series, I'll explain a little more as to why. What you're looking for when you're picking between these two maps is what is the unit I'm mapping. So you're looking for basically unit size. If you're mapping rooms, boop, you're going up that way. If you're mapping tiles or hallways, architecture is a good way to think of it. Architecture. I'm not even sure I was close to spelling that right. We're not going to worry about that right now. But if you're mapping the actual structure of the map, that's more what you want to go with. The advantages to a grid-based system is you're going to find secrets and get a sense of the bounds of the game world. This is, the advantages here is it's very freeform. Very, maps don't have to obey physics. And boop, maps don't have to obey physics. I'm starting to get bigger than my camera here. Which, when we're playing fantasy games, happens more often than you'd think due to teleporters or one-way passages or something like that. So, look at your game, and that's going to dictate what type of map you're going to use. It's not to say I couldn't map this grid here I just drew out with a bubble map. I could just as easily go circle, line, circle, line, circle, line, circle, line, circle, and then on this one put something through the line that suggests it keeps going. It's just not a good use of space, and it doesn't tell the same story as easily as that does. So look for unit of size, look for what you're trying to map, look for what you're trying to measure. And then once you have this done, this is where you're going to start. Once you've gotten this concept down, now you want to start adding your notes to each map. Like you'll see here, I added a little square to signify a door. This is from old Dungeons and Dragons style mapping things. And you'll see some of my old Dungeons and Dragons style insignias soon here too. But let's take our bubble maze. Let's say this passage only goes one way. We can turn that into an arrow. If this door goes only one way, we can add an arrow to it. Sometimes there's darkness in the mazes. You just want to do some little squiggle, some little thing. It doesn't have to make sense. Don't worry about keying it or making it look real pretty or anything like that. Just have it be something that works for you so that when you look at that, oh, I'll bet there's darkness there, or oh, there's something else. One of the things I normally do, and we might as well jump into some of the examples here and go right into, I broke some of my own rules with Lords of Midnight. Like normally if I want to make a forest, I'll draw a little tree like that. And if it's a bigger forest, we'll keep adding trees and more trees and more trees. And I will have water kind of get shaded in real quick and easy. So it looks like trees by water. But with Lords of Midnight, there wasn't any standing water. There was little pools here and there. But the trees themselves would take up huge swaths of area. So I switched those around. This is easier for me to draw and easier for me to work with. So if we actually go in and look at my Lords of Midnight map, we can see my triangles for mountains and some of the symbols I'm left to give, like these are hills and this is a cave and this is a wizard tower. But then for the forests, I made them nice, congruous swaths of just shaded area. And in another game, I would have looked at this and thought it's water, but because I know it's Lords of Midnight, I know this means forest. So don't be afraid to break the rules. Don't be afraid to have a style that works for one game and then doesn't work for another. I want to do one more talk on grids here real quick. I'm going to just flip this over because there are two ways to think about grids in these old games, and it depends on the type of game you're playing. If you're playing a wizardry or you're playing Bard's Tale or Might and Magic, the rooms and the halls are all like this. So the wall does not take up any space within the map. The wall is just that. It is a line between two units. Ooh, come back, camera. Okay, so we have our wizardry stuff here. The other option is when you have like your Ultima or your Bard's Tale cities, the walls and the everything take space. So you might have something that looks like this, where you know you can actually even just fill in this as a solid object because if you can see it, you know it goes all the way through one unit, and a door takes a unit and things like that. So work with the game too and look at how it builds. That's going to help give you a sense of things. With grids in the early games, it used to be like Bard's Tale was a 21 by 21 grid. Ultima was a 16 by 16 grid. And Ultima 1, I believe, was 10 by 10. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that was the case for Ultima 1. And usually what was nice about those is if you went, you could basically go down the side and go 21, 20, 19, 18, etc. down to 2, 3, 1, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. And a lot of them would put the entry stairs right there in the corner. I would always just draw my stairs with an arrow. And they'd give you a spell that would say, I am this many squares up, this many squares over, this many floors down. And you could figure out exactly where you were based on this gridded system. Once you got into games like Curse of the Azure Bonds and Pool of Radiance, they stopped playing nice. And things didn't necessarily line up as you moved from area to area. This area here is the sewers under Tillerton for Curse of the Azure Bonds. And even though like each of these sections is essentially the same shape and size, they're all half a step over as it goes. So this is a section loaded in the computer, this is a section loaded in the computer, and then there's the final section down below. It's not an even run. You need to pay attention as we get into the 90s when they could get more clever with maps and do things from them. And these are my actual, these are not my first copies of this map from 20 years ago. This is a copy of a copy I made for myself after the fact. A lot of my initial maps look a lot rougher. And this is where when you're starting out, like here's some of mine and my friends' maps from Ultima 3 back in the late 80s. It's rough. We have just question marks down for things. We weren't really paying attention. We write some stuff down. Ultima. A lot of Ultima back then. More Ultima. Here's some of our early Bard's Tale maps. They're not your first map might not look great. And we got notes on the bottom. Your first map might not look great. We would draw stuff in pencil and then go back and ink over it to make it look a little better once we were 100% sure we had a good looking map and something that worked. Just kind of going through here, seeing if I can find anything else. I know there is in here an Ultimate format, I want to say. I want to talk about those a little bit. Here's Bard's Tale 3, where it starts getting weird. The maps didn't necessarily line up the way you think they would. But about Bard's Tale 3 era, you start getting into your into your auto mapping, so it doesn't matter as much. This is what I wanted to show. So here is some, man, I think this is Ultima 5. It might be Ultima 4. You can see where I was taking time to draw out the maps originally. And when I viewed a gem, trying to figure out exactly how it was all lined up. But then you can see here, I'm doing a grid map, but I'm doing a quick cheat. Instead of, like if I wanted to draw this, I would just draw, put an X there. Same thing this way. So I know that these are actually the squares. This is what I mean by break the rules. Do what you need to do to draw the maps in how you want and then flesh them out later. So like you can do quick, easy draws and then build a better looking map later if you want. Along this note and this thing, I want to show the example of a good bubble map. This actually came with the Treasures of Infocom. This is their map. It's kind of hard to see because they put it on that. Maybe if we open it up, it'll be a little easier. You can see that some of their stuff doesn't necessarily go the way you think it will. So the maze was a better example, but here's a good one up in this corner. You leave south from this room, and you have to leave northeast from this room for them to connect. You leave southeast from this room, but you have to leave east to get back to there. And if you go to the north, it'll constantly circle around on itself. So when you have a text game or something where the rooms themselves aren't necessarily going to hold true, you're going to want that kind of variation in each to help you there. I'm looking right now for my Deathlord maps. Deathlord was one of those games where the maps were not first person, but they were on a grid. So here we have a map, Troll Hole, and it's full of swamp, so I have a little swamp icon, doors. The shading in this case, again, like I said before, for Lords of Midnight, shading was forest for me. In this game, shading is water. When I had time and energy to go back over, I actually used colored pencil to kind of clean it up. But this is the map I was mostly looking for and what I wanted to talk about for units. So this is the world map. And what we discovered is every time you go off a square, it will reload it'll load a new section from map. And we could tell by disks swapping how far we'd gone along, and we could use that to navigate between land masses. So we just needed to know which area had a landmass on it, and that's how we could get around and find where we needed to go for things. We even figured out where the side A and side B of the discs are, that sort of thing. I think it's interesting that side 8 had less space on it in terms of the outdoor world. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe there were more cities up here. But it's looking for that smallest unit and how you're going to map it and what you're going to do with that. And then add your own little embellishments and stuff for fun. In this case, we used actually lettering instead of numbers. We were so sick of numbering everything, we started using letters for our quadrants. And I believe that's it. I believe that's everything I want to kind of show you to get you started on drawing your own maps. I hope that's a helpful way to kind of go in and get your feet wet. Let me know for the next game I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to talk about King's Quest. Whoop, spin this around. King's Quest is not a point and click, but it falls into that same sort of adventure style gaming and uses, in this case, I'm going to use Bubble, and I will explain why I picked Bubble for that and Grid for Quest for Glory, and hope this helps some people. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching.